Hi, I'm Ray Riley from the Green Hills Art Gallery Committee. This is Indigenous Art number 2. And here we will have Ruth Larson presenting a rather sobering account of the plight of Southwest Native Americans. And then Jean Laurie will tell us how Chinese peasant farmers became painters. So enjoy the show. Ruth Larson has several Indigenous artworks in the show, and I especially love the weaving of the Corn Maidens. So Ruth, how did you happen to have that, and how long have you had it?
My daughter has lived in New Mexico for the last 30 years, and then as I have gone down to visit her and spend time with her, we have spent a lot of time traveling the state and being familiar with the area. It's a poor state. There are a lot of Indian tribes which have live in the area of New Mexico, probably because of the Rio Grande River and the source of water. Over time, we have gotten to know the state, and one of the things that is most notable is the Crown Point Rug Association auctions that happen every year for about 3 or 4 times a year, usually in seasonal weather. They don't do it in winter. So one of the times when I was down there 10 or 12 years ago, we went up to this auction. These auctions are very famed. They are advertised. They are well attended, both by dealers and just people that are interested in the rug weaving art. And we went up. The Indian weavers have their just rugs out on display. We can look at that and visit with the artists. I bought 2 of these rugs, this Indian maiden, and then another rug with the traditional geometric patterns. I don't remember how much I paid for them, and I don't remember the name of the artist, regrettably. But I have never regretted buying the 2. I've really enjoyed them.
Well, we have been enjoying this one a huge amount. Now, what does the Corn Maidens rug tell us?
Well, first, corn was always considered a very essential part of their food, so it stands for the sustenance of life. The Corn Maidens were, women did the farming. Men were off hunting and fishing and all that sort of thing. But the women did the agriculture and tended the crops. So, and they also have Corn Maidens also have a mythical, supposedly when New Mexico or the earth, people began populating the earth, Corn Woman and Corn Maiden emerged from some subterranean place, erupted onto the earth's surface, and with them they brought corn. That's what the corn means.
Now, why do you think that recognizing and appreciating Indigenous art is important?
First, just because it should be recognized as a very viable art. I mean, it represents a very complex, civilized nation of the native peoples. When the European invaders came over, they subjugated, enslaved, actually annihilated. There was a drastic decimation and loss of Indian life. Some of it was due to diseases which they had no resistance to, but a great deal of it was just simply annihilation. The Europeans, as they came in and claimed this territory as their own, they swept aside the Indian tribes. And this manifold destiny that they seemed to feel, this was theirs, they were going to conquer it, and they were going to use it to their own advantage. And the Indians suffered greatly. That's something that our ancestors did that we should not be very proud of at all. Not only did they sweep the Indians aside into tribal areas, they tried to re-educate them, get them assimilated into the superior culture, because the Indian people were thought of as being subhuman, savage, unsophisticated, unknowledgeable. It didn't work. They actually took for a while children from parents and put them in schools where they had to speak English, had to dress as Westerns, have haircuts. That didn't work. They also tried to convert them to Christianity. That didn't work. Basically, they were just very, very badly treated. So who were the Indians? Well, first off, they were named Indians because when Columbus came sailing west, supposedly to Asia, they were ignorant of the very fact that there was a North and South American continents that were laying in the way. So when they touched land and saw these people, they thought they were Indians from Indians. So the very name Indian itself is a misnomer. There's a lot of dispute about when it happened and how it happened. But the major 20 or 30,000 years ago, people came from Asia across the Bering Strait down into what is now Alaska. This happened about at the end of the last ice age. So there was a corridor down through what is now the Canadian provinces. And so these peoples swept south all the way down through Central America, all the way down into South America. They swept east and west. And over the thousands of years ensuing, they developed, depending upon resources on hand, but they did develop a very unique civilization that had a lot of technical skills, ingenuity of using what they had. It was a very, very, very close-knit civilization. One of the things that they developed was agricultural, and the three main, if we're talking about the Southwest, the three main foodstuffs were corn, beans, and squash. Corn and beans taken together contain all of the essential amino acids that is needed for a complete protein. All three of the vegetables, corn, beans, and squash, are a complete diet. Corn needs a lot of nitrogen. So imagine a stalk of corn needing nitrogen at its base and growing up the stalk with its tentacles. There's the beans. Beans as a legume provide the nitrogen, and squash encircling the stalk provides shelter, shading the ground, so to speak. So this was a very sophisticated system. The Navajos themselves came at a later time, and they were nomadic for a while. But about the time of the 1600s, they, because of the invasion of the Europeans and association with the Pueblo villages, became a pastoral society and began raising sheep and goats, and from thence the wool weaving. So that's
it's
about
big.
all I need to say, I think. I hope.
That was an extremely good lesson in how this all came to be. And even with all of the problems, the indigenous people still have their art,
They still have their art.
and we can still enjoy that.
It was a very civilized
Mhm.
nation.
Yeah.
Different, but very
Yeah.
civilized.
Well, thank you, Ruth. This has been good. Jean Laurie has such interesting art in her collection, and I was really glad to see this one for our Indigenous Art show. So, Jean, how did you get this painting?
Well, I bought this painting in Xi'an on my third visit to Xi'an in 1997. And I bought it on a street market, so to speak, but the street market was on the city wall and at the south gate. And these walls were built in the 1300s, the late 1300s, as fortification. And now they're a tourist destination for the guided tours in Xi'an. But on my previous two tours, we had not been taken there or had the option of going there because, of course, in Xi'an are the terracotta warriors, and that's where the emphasis is, and that's really very, very interesting. But anyway, on my third visit to China in 1997, one of the optional tours was to visit the city walls, and I had heard that these peasant farmers, painters, which I knew nothing about, sometimes sold their products there. And sure enough, when we got to the wall, it's 25 feet high, 45 feet wide, so it's very, very wide. And there are no cars, of course, it's just walkers and bicyclists. And a few farmers had paintings on the pavement and anchored down with rocks because they weren't framed, of course, and they didn't want them to blow away. And I just fell in love. I loved this one, and so I bought it at a very cheap price. I thought, I remembered that I'd only paid $1 for it, but when I looked up my notes on my trip, I paid $10 for it.
Oh, my goodness.
Which still seemed a bargain to me. And I bought it because it appealed to me. It's such a quiet, peaceful, serene, and you'd always, when you saw school children out going to school or going on a field trip, they were always together in a line, very obedient. And so that kind of brought that remembrance back to me. And then also, I liked the perspective, the road going, that really appealed to me. And I liked the colors. So that's why I bought it. But interestingly enough, I didn't hang it on my wall. I didn't get it framed. And I bought it in '97, and I was living in Santa Cruz at the time and had absolutely no wall space for another picture or hanging. And so not until I moved to Davis in 2005, I got it framed. In probably 2006, I had a lot of wall space there. And so I've had it on my wall since 2006. My previous two visits to China and Xi'an, one was in '82 and one was in '84. There were lots of street markets in '84, but they really got wise to the tourist trade because in '82 we were taken to many different places, And we were taken to a commune, and we could walk around the commune and see how they lived, and, you know, it seemed very primitive to us. But they were, of course, very proud because they had this community. And we were also, among other places, taken to a hospital, and we were just horrified. We could walk around, I mean, that seemed so unsanitary, the hospital itself, we were just, but it was very, very interesting, very interesting. And we were always accompanied by a guide, you know, we weren't free to roam around, but we were free to roam around this. And there weren't many street markets at that time, but they took us at the end to the Friendship store. And that's where we could buy the native, but I didn't see any paintings there. In '84, we were no longer taken to a hospital. We went to a commune, but we just sat in the meeting room and had tea with them. We didn't get to roam around. It was very scripted, but we went to a lot of places where factories, where they were, or workshops they call them, where they were doing all their native crafts, their embroidery, jade cutting, silk making, embroidery, and we saw these people doing these things. And then they would take us to the shop and we would have a huge display, you know, to make our selections from. They really wised up. I mean, they really wised up. But never did I see, I never saw any peasant paintings in either of those two visits. I bought a lot of things, but I didn't buy any peasant paintings. So
why do you think the peasant farmers took up painting?
well, it was a government. And it was a result of, first, the taking away of all the farm, in the 1950s, you know, the government the communists had taken over China, and the farmers could no longer own their own land. They were organized into communes, and they grew the crops for the government, you know, and then the government distributed them. And of course, then during the winter, what were they going to do? So the government thought it would be a fine thing for them to paint, because of course they were trying to promote the idea of the proletariat being, we don't need the elite, we don't need the educated, we don't need the upper class. Everybody, you know, can create art. And so they gave the people the materials, and during the off season, during the winter, they were supposed to paint in their homes and paint pictures of happy farmers, hardworking farmers, huge crops, and having fun, and idealized village life. And then the better productions, they reproduced, the government reproduced and used as posters to politically promote the collectivization, the founding of the communes, and the government taking over, no individual ownership. And so that happened. And then in the 60s and 70s, they started to promote this even more. And of course, in the 60s and 70s, you had the Cultural Revolution and the purging of all educated people, professional people, descendants who didn't approve of the government taking, and they were sent to the country to be re-educated and to learn to work and to work with their hands and produce things for the state. And artists, professional artists, could no longer paint, they were sent to these, well, they were sent to Xi'an, or not to Xi'an, but to Huxan, which is about 25 miles southwest of Xi'an, where these peasant farmers had started. And by that time, they had a workshop for them. And these professional painters were supposed to train them, and the style changed a great deal because they showed them how to introduce perspective and paint more realistic looking people. And so they greatly improved their paintings. But of course they were they'd been dismissed from it. They'd been relocated was the term they used. And they still use them for political purpose, political propaganda. They wanted them, I mean, the government controlled what pictures they wanted them to paint. But in the 60s and then in the 70s, they began to attain some international recognition in the art market, and there were some very successful painters, and they even made a name for themselves, and so the output greatly increased. And by in 1988, the government declared Huxian, or the workshop for the center, what did they call it? Oh, it was named the County of Painting by the Ministry of Culture in 1988. And they now even have an exhibition hall where they display all these paintings. And there are many different styles. And of course, they're widely available now on eBay and Etsy and galleries. There are galleries that sell, and you'll notice a big difference in the style of the early paintings in 1950 and the ones that are being produced now. So, and some of these people are even recognized their names, you know, when I assume that that's the name of the painter. Doesn't mean anything to me. I just bought this because I liked it, not because it was done by a famous painter. And then they have been exhibited in museums internationally. And now there are tours that just go to Huxian to see the workshop there and to see the hall of paintings and to buy paintings. But and I don't know, this was 1997 that I got this. I don't know now in this century, but they're still, as I say, they're available.
Well, Jean, I always learn a whole lot from you, so I'm really glad that you shared the story of this and what was going on.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting that it was, you know, the result of the great leap forward in the Cultural Revolution and the communists taking over that we have this. We might not ever have it. Just left to their own devices. They might never have taken up painting. There, of course, there'd always be the professional painters who.
Okay, thank you, Jean.